What's the creepiest thing you've ever witnessed? Episode 2. I was on guard duty. Isolated location. Any real backup, half an hour away. Dark, windy, and raining a lot. It was in fact not calm before the storm. It was a bit stormy before the storm. This was around 3 a.m. So there I was, walking my rounds armed with a huge-ass flashlight straight out of an 80s or a 90s movie and an ICE phone. The flashlight illuminated up to a meter. Half of the area I was guarding didn't have any lights, and it was pure darkness outside the fence. I was basically standing there, alone in the open, in a poorly lit fishbowl. I had done my due diligence before the round and watched the feed from surveillance cameras, but the rain meant that visibility was next to nothing anyway. It wasn't a high-risk place, but due to tens of millions worth of equipment, maybe hundreds of millions, plus weapons, there was always a risk of someone trying to get in. It didn't help that I knew how easy it was at the time to break in. After all, fences are primarily there to keep law-abiding citizens away. I was at the end of my round. The rain had let up a bit. I got through the dark part without incident and was in the poorly lit area. I was heading back to the warmth of my guard cabin. Then I got this feeling that I should look towards the middle of this compound that was quite an undeveloped area. I don't remember hearing a sound. It was just a feeling. I turned my head left. Nothing was there. But in the corner of my eye, I saw a human-sized figure taking off. It's funny how many thoughts one can go through when the adrenaline kicks in. I like to think I put my chest out back straight and chin up, but I probably gave a hunchback a run for their money while trying to shuffle the flashlight in the direction of whatever was running. It wasn't a man, it wasn't a ghost, it wasn't a Wendigo, Indigo, or Ninjago. It was a deer. This Bambi crept up next to me without a sound. It was the second time a deer got my heart pounding while on guard duty. These animals. I lived on Shoal Creek in Lawrenceburg, Tennessee, growing up. When I was around 5 or 6 years old, I walked down to the creek to explore. This was breaking the rules because there were water moccasins in the creek. We were punished if we went down to the creek without an adult. While I got down to the water's edge, I heard a man crying out for help. I looked about 20 feet down and saw a grown man lashed, spread-eagled to 4 stakes in the ground. He had what looked like honey or syrup poured across his face. Ants and other insects were crawling all over him. He begged me to help, but the ropes were too tight for me to untie. This is where my memory fails me. I don't remember if I ran home to tell my mother and risk punishment for going to the creek, or if I kept quiet to save myself. It's been over 50 years, and it still causes me grief and guilt. My wife and I were living in South Texas in a top-floor apartment, and we shared that floor with one neighbor. He was single and living alone, had always been nice to us, and even helped us move in. We'd share food with him sometimes. He'd share with us, too. When we broke the grill, he'd join us, and we had an enjoyable time. He was doing his residency. My wife and I were living in South Texas in a top-floor apartment, and we shared that floor with one neighbor. He was single and living alone, had always been nice to us, and even helped us move in. We'd share food with him sometimes. He'd share with us, too. When we broke the grill, he'd join us, and we had an enjoyable time. He was doing his residency at a local hospital and seemed to love his work. He talked about his family sometimes. From what I gathered, they lived in Mumbai, and they had a lot riding on him succeeding in the U.S. He talked a lot about wanting to go home and see his parents and sisters, and that he had a trip home planned shortly. I was sitting on the porch a week afterward, and here and there, the breeze shifted, and my skin would just crawl like I was about to be sick. That went on for a few days, and I noticed my cat seemed weirded out by something. We just had somebody move downstairs, and I thought maybe they were just making noise and dismissed it. It was summer, and in South Texas, it gets hot. Like disgustingly hot. I was on my way home from work and got to the top of the stairs, and the faintest little whiff of something hit me, and it's too subdued to be identifiable, but something about it just lit me up in that hindbrain kind of way, and I figured it might be a gas leak, so I went and knocked on the neighbor's door to warn him about it. He didn't answer, and the smell was stronger near his door, and I panicked. I grabbed his key off the top of the frame and unlocked it and yelled at him through the open door, and it's hot and dark and it reeks, and there's movement in the air, and it takes me a minute to figure out what is going on. The air is full of flies. Big black flies. The kind I only ever remembered seeing on roadkill. I'm not a smart woman. I'm not. If I were smart, I wouldn't have turned on the light and found him sitting on the couch facing me, looking at me, discolored in purple and black and spilling and covered in flies. He'd been sitting there, dead in the dark, his eyes fixed on the door at me the whole time. It's sad because he was a great guy, but every time I think of him, I remember his dull, dead eyes staring at me in the dark. That still trumps every other creepy thing I've ever seen. One night after work, I was tired, obviously. I left my keys on the door, and in the morning, they were gone. I thought that my neighbors on the floor took them, so nobody else could, but that wasn't the case. I was still hopeful that whoever took them would reach out to me to tell me and return them, but I found it very strange as I lived on the 6th floor. In the meantime, I made a copy of my landlord's. Anyway, a few days later, it was my day off. Though I heard some noise, I wasn't sure, but that's when my cats reacted and immediately jumped to the door. I quickly followed. Mind you, I'm a girl living alone, and I saw someone was trying to unlock my door. Thankfully, my door had a thumb-turn lock from the inside that I grabbed onto with my shaky hands, trying to resist the unlocking. Eventually, the intruder got the idea and quickly took off, and I only managed to see his back as he got in the elevator. Time passed, and when I got together, my first job was to call somebody to change my lock, as I was worried about leaving my place unattended. A few days later, in the evening, everything is fine, and I'm calm until somebody starts profusely ringing my doorbell and scares my cats. I quietly get to the door to check, and I see whoever is covering the peephole. My knees started to shake, but shortly after, I heard the elevator door close and he left. I took a chair and sat for some time at the door, jumping at every noise from the elevator until I made sure it was safe for me to go to bed. After that, I had recurring nightmares about someone breaking in. I was a nuke in the Navy for 11 years, specifically a mechanic. I was stationed on an aircraft carrier for 4 years out of San Diego. Carriers have 2 nuclear power plants, and I was a mechanic in the number 2 plant. It was always a wild rumor that the number 1 plant was haunted. This sort of story is super common in the Navy. Some shipyard bubba killed himself / fell down a hatch. Now his ghost haunts this area, or something along those lines. When the plants are shut down in port, there are only a handful of people in the plant at night. The shutdown reactor operator, SRO, and shutdown roving watch, SRW, are required to be there at all times. While the SRO has to stay in a certain area to monitor the reactor, the SRW is supposed to continuously tour the plant. This usually happens on a 6-on/6 off schedule on a 24-hour duty day, meaning that on your back 6, as an SRW, you're pretty much alone in the plant at 2 a.m. with only the SRO stuck in their box to talk to occasionally. I ended up getting stuck in number 1 plant a lot as the SRW because my duty section didn't have a whole lot of number 1 planters around. And if you're qualified in one, you're qualified in both. The SRW isn't allowed to operate anything. If something routine needs to be accomplished, that's up to the reactor mechanical operator, RMO, who can also leave the plant and is usually in berthing sleeping during the night. Every day at midnight, there are certain daily maintenance procedures that need to be done, specifically in an area called Charging Station Watch, CSW. My RMO would refuse to do them if I didn't accompany them, as he absolutely believed that number 1 CSW was haunted. Now, wanting the company to keep me awake at night, I'd agree to hang out with them as they work. Now, CSW is always a few degrees colder than the rest of the plant, but I swear it always felt colder down there than it should be. And I'd swear I'd hear noises behind me as I walk into the next watch station to take logs, but in a 40-plus-year-old plant, it's not uncommon to hear noises like these. Nonetheless, I'd sprint near to the next watch station for logs every time. I'm not superstitious, but being alone in a plant at 1 a.m. will change your mind. The part that did it for me, though, was standing number 1 SRW one night. We were on maintenance availability, so there was a lot of extra equipment set up around the plant for various shipyard work. I had just stepped down in a number 1 CSW for my 2 a.m. log set after taking the watch and was navigating around some scaffolding for logs when one of the chain fall hoists started cycling behind. Now, For those who aren't aware of what a chain fall hoist is, it's a 2-point pulley that connect between an eye bolt and whatever you're trying to lift with some hooks and chains. There's a chain loop that you pull to raise or lower the hoist, kind of like old blinds. These chain hoists, especially the ones used to move steam plant equipment around, are huge and they require a bit of exertion to pull them. The chain hoist next to me was free spinning like somebody was pulling it up. I got out of there immediately, took the stairs 3 at a time to the SRO, and called berthing. My RMO was back there, and I was the only one in the plant at the time. No one could have cycled the chain fall and hidden since it was only a few feet behind me, and you can hear every footstep on the diamond deck on a shut-down plant. Needless to say, I stayed with the SRO the whole time and did not ever stand number 1 SRW again. My uncle has vast open desert land in Bakersfield, California. There are some mountains that transition into his yard with a valley of hills and big desert trees. My 4 older siblings would take me, and we would go hunting. It wasn't real hunting. One person held a gun while we explored and went sightseeing. It was only for protection. We were never offensively hunting. We climbed to the top of a small rock formation that overlooked the entire valley of trees and mountains, and you can see my uncle's house, which is about 5 minutes away from us at this point. Suddenly, a lot of thrashing and strange guttural noises came from a patch of trees. The trees shook, and a flock of birds came scurrying out into the sky. We were terrified and could only think of mountain lions. Quickly, we heard amazingly fast footsteps and rustling closing in on us now. We decided to stay put since we were a group and felt that running would make some of us vulnerable. Closer and closer, we can hear soft panting now. Closer and closer, we can hear footsteps. The bushes shook, and BM. Out of the bushes came my uncle's property dog, Goldie, tail wagging and tongue out. We started laughing, and she actually guided us back to the house. My uncle had 3 property dogs, 2 pit bulls, and 1 wolf dog. They were absolute sweethearts and kept us safe. Unfortunately, Goldie was killed by a rattlesnake a few years later protecting one of the other dogs. We never felt safe with her being in the desert after that. I used to work the night audit shift at an old hotel in Branson, Missouri. It was just me from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. And let me tell you, that place had its share of creepy moments. One night, around 3 a.m., I got a call from a guest on the 2nd floor. She was convinced she heard a woman screaming, like she was being murdered. I thought, great, just another night in this eerie building. As I walked to check it out, I turned a corner and came face to face with an elderly woman in a white nightgown, pale as a ghost, screaming, "He's going to kill me. Help!" My heart raced. I quickly took her to the front desk to call 911. Just then, a man approached, claiming to be her son. He explained she had Alzheimer's and was lost in her own mind. That moment shook me. It was my first encounter with Alzheimer's, and it left a lasting fear. The idea of losing one's grip on reality is haunting. It's a reminder of how our minds can be and how quickly everything can change.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.